Hello and welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Margiela Day, and John Galliano yesterday announced that he was going to do the first artisanal for men, which in terms of Margiela means the first couture, haute couture show for men. So we're very excited with a panel of experts that I would like them to introduce themselves, starting with you, Todd.
I'm Todd Lynn, I'm a designer.
I'm Shonagh Marshall and I'm a curator and writer.
I'm Jeffrey Horsley, I work at London College of Fashion and I'm the MA Fashion Curation course leader.
Hi, I'm Joe Bobowicz and I'm a writer.
So, very interesting panel. Everybody is a Margiela fan, I hear, so we will have a lot to say. There is a lot to say about this show because, as I said, yesterday John published an interview where he was explaining that he was doing couture, and he said he was very excited about what's happening right now in the fashion world, and especially in the men's fashion. And he was mentioning the fact that Virgil was doing his first show for Vuitton, Kim is gone to Dior, and we will have Hedi for Celine, not to forget, soon in the women's ready-to-wear season. And so he said I needed to up my game, and he was wanting to put in practice his obsession for quality and tailoring and cutting and all the things that you will explain much better than me into men's. So before letting you talk about this fact and actually what probably Margiela did, I would like to ask you a question about, do you think that couture for men makes sense? And if yes, why? And if not, why? And maybe there is a little bit of, my question is a little bit commercial as well here.
But if you take couture as technique, rather than its position within a fashion system, why would it not work for men?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Couture is such a defined sort of club as what the word means, but actually what you said about the approach could be, you know, why shouldn't men have the opportunity to have garments that have that?
As he said, they're made for you. It's a new way of thinking about bespoke. And he was even telling about a client of his that he couldn't mention, with whom he was fitting. He was fitting a client to his bespoke bias cut suit, and he said, I could see his face and how he was feeling beautiful and empowered in it. But and I know you're a designer, but does couture for men sell? Do men want bespoke, unique pieces?
I think if they were in the position to be able to go there, I think they would. It's a bit like the person who tries on the first piece of designer who only bought high street. They suddenly feel the difference.
Yes.
And I think you do have the same thing. And it probably, I mean, to be fair, let's not forget Savile Row, which existed for a long time, where people would actually have bespoke things made for them. I think the difference here is it's connecting this idea of gender and connecting this idea of technique, which is normally meant for women's wear, into menswear, which is just a technique, so it's transferable.
So it's fantastic. It's exactly what he says. It's like, what does it mean? Why does it have to be for women only? Did you want to say anything, Joe?
Ultimately, I think, though, the cuts that he's used do look feminine on the men, and Galliano's donned that kind of femininity for men for years and years. But I don't think it's not Savile Row tailoring, it's very much kind of curvature of the body and flexibility, and
so
it's more elegant.
There is a narrative about the, non-binary gender approach and all of that. I suggest that we watch the show, but before, Lara, before starting, I would like to explain what we're going to do. So as everybody probably knows by now, John also released a podcast where he's very beautifully and in a very articulate way, he's describing what he did. So, because it's quite long, we cut it down to 4 minutes, and so I would ask my panelists to watch the images of the whole of the 34 looks by listening to his voice. And by the way, as Nick Knight was reminding me earlier, is that once John told him that he thinks it's not very appropriate to talk over the few minutes at the beginning of a show, we have to let people go in. So let's watch it with his voice talking about that.
I just got so excited with the changing landscape of menswear and the new energy that's coming in at different houses. It's a really exciting time, I think, for menswear, so I thought that it would be a really good time for me to focus on artisanal for man, because it's something that I believe in, and to take this season to do it. There is a ready-to-wear collection as well, but I've taken the key silhouettes, if you like, and that's what you will be seeing in this collection. It's made up mainly of tailoring, straight of grain, and the bias, which is really exciting and a genre of cutting that I've been wanting to explore further for some time. The bias cuts. And along with that comes a whole new vocabulary of fabrics and a new relationship with them, which I am learning every day as we're going along. A way of perhaps beginning to redefine what is a new masculinity or even femininity through cutting. If you had a napkin at home and you hold it like a square, and you pull the left and the right side simultaneously, that's what we call straight of grain. Now turn that square into a diamond, let's say, and pull the opposite corners. And when you pull, you'll see what happens. There's a natural elasticity in the fabric, and that's when you've hit the true bias. That natural elasticity is the most modern thing any guy could wear. It's liberating after it's been painted or dyed or woven, because then it stretches, it drops. So before you can even place anything on the body, you have to let it hang for like 7 days. Then you can go into it and start molding on the body. Then you take it away again, and you have to hang. Each time you have to let the fabric hang, because otherwise, if you put it together like that, like ready to wear, you look a real mess. You have to let it hang and drop, hang and drop. Then remodel it on the body, baste it, never sew it, baste it, there's the big tap marks. Then on the boy, you put it on, you do the fitting, but you don't sew it, you leave it basted until 24 hours before. By which time it will have hung as much as it's going to drop. Fun. You're not forcing it to do anything. It tells you what to do. That's the real luxe. What is sexy today? I mean, it's a moment to collectively redefine what it means, could mean today. The millennials and the Z generation, gay marriages is history. For them, it's like old news. I mean, we've lived through it. So their view is completely different of the world. And of course, one understands it, but you can't put yourself in those shoes, can you? You can only be alive around these people. Same thing, what's masculine, there's a whole debate one could have about what is formal today and what is not formal. That street culture will always be an inspiration and an influence on us all, because that's where the energy is, that's where the kids, you know, when their backs are up against the wall, they get creative, don't they? They express themselves. And that energy has always influenced creation, always. And honestly, as in with the artisanal women, what I'm showing is just an example of what we can achieve. Of course, any of these things, whether it's an embroidery or fabric, can be interpreted for you. You may like what I've done with the kimonos, but not necessarily on that Macintosh silhouette, and you may want a suit in it. Well, that's my job. What is feminine today, really? I hope this is the beginning of a journey to help us discover a new sensuality, a new sexuality, breaking down preconceived ideas of what's masculine and what's feminine through cutting skills that I've learned, and I'm still learning.
I'm still learning. This is the sentence that really closes the podcast, and I think it's very nice, and I can hear a lot of pleasure for what he's doing and a lot of enthusiasm. But what do we think about what you saw, about what you heard, whatever? What are your first reactions? Anyone?
I love the fact that he's asking people to engage with fashion from a technical perspective. And he keeps talking about bias, and he always has talked about bias, and he explains it, and he always explains it very beautifully. But rather than image making, he's putting technique and skill right at the center of what he does.
That's very interesting. It's very different from what everybody else does. So I think it's a brilliant, if it's strategic or spontaneous, but it's a brilliant way to put himself at a different level, fashion-wise.
I think he's so different, and he comes from a different space and place. And if you compare, like in the notes, it says reflecting on the streetwear culture. It's kind of like him saying that he knows that that's going on, and he knows that that's not his thing. You know, I don't think he says that he's inspired by subculture or the street or in the podcast, but I think that you're so right, and I think it's really enlightening to hear him talk about it in that beautiful way, and you really can visualize how he's thinking about the fabric and how the form, and then he commissioned the sculptures, and it kind of links it all together. But I like the way the podcast, obviously being curator, is so accessible. You know, you could listen to that and learn things and understand things.
Everybody could.
Everybody could.
I've been listening to it 5 times today to find the snippets, and I can tell you it's very, very clear.
That's key for now. Like, why would you make something that speaks or preaches to the converted? And fashion does that a lot. So it's quite nice that it's not that. And I think that's probably because it's been done in a way where it is to reach and communicate. I mean, my big question was, do you think there's a hunger for men to go and have that exchange? He was talking about, oh, you don't like the kimono with the Macintosh.
I think there is. I think there is, especially
like
as you're saying that there's a lot of kind of streetwear brands and stuff coming into the scene, and a lot of the focus is on like the conceptual side of things and just the prints and having a reference to something. Whereas this, for me, doesn't seem that conceptual. Rather, it seems almost like costume. And it's exciting in the fact that, you know, it's got a lot of technical aspects, it's thought about, and I feel like a lot of men are getting a bit tired of just kind of buying a t-shirt, buying an item of clothing and knowing how it's going to fit. With this, you get to the like full experience. You're going to stand in it, you're going to see how it drapes on you, and I think that's different.
So you're saying costume is not negative?
No, I don't think so.
I'm just really intrigued about that character who I don't know who that person is. I'm just being like, trying to connect. Like
the man who wants...
Who would like email Margiela and say, I really want to go and kind of have this appointment. Who is that?
What I'm not clear about is it couture or is it artisanal? Because for me, they're 2 very different things. Artisanal is handmade, couture is made to fit our body.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, from what I understood and from what I read and from what I know about what Margiela calls artisanal, it's
handmade.
I think it's their way of saying that couture is bespoke and also handmade.
Yeah.
But so they're offering this service that you can...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's sort of my question.
It's also well explained in the podcast that people will be able to listen entirely on SHOWstudio after this. But it's explained, and also before, I know you want to talk, but also there is one thing at the beginning of the podcast that really made me smile is when he tells us how he stumbled upon bias cut. He didn't know what it was, and then he explains that he was doing a shoulder in a certain way, and someone said, but that's bias, you have to look, a sleeve, sorry, and that you have to look up at the work of Madame Vionnet, and he said, she's the queen of bias, and I studied it, and then he starts explaining, so it's really humble in a way.
I mean, I think it's interesting when you talk about bias and that, because the other thing too is that when you do bias in tailoring, it doesn't have the same effect as when you do it in satin. The satin weave is looser, so the stronger the weave, the less bias you're going to have. So when you start getting into the tailoring aspect, it's already a little bit controlled. And you can see he's used checker pattern to actually visually show you that it's bias. Because without the checker pattern, you wouldn't necessarily see it.
Can you tell me where? And maybe Lara, can you show this?
I can't remember the look.
I'd wonder how many people would see it.
The thing in tailoring. The thing is, when you're talking satin and the satin back crepe, which he speaks about in the podcast, that obviously, because of the way that it actually fits the body, because you were talking about that earlier, about getting garments to fit the body, and you can see in the tailoring, it doesn't have that kind of hourglass kind of coming in so much because it can't.
And don't you think there's a really beautiful tension, though, between tailoring, which is generally about a sculptural form and shaping the body, and bias cut, which is generally about fitting too? And I'm not saying they're incompatible, but I think there's a really beautiful tension in exploring the two techniques together.
But we should also point out that bias cut was originally invented because we didn't have elastic.
Yeah.
So let's take it back to the beginning.
Okay.
Bias cut was because you didn't have elastic or knit fabrics. So you created the bias so that you would create something that would actually suck you in, type of thing.
Do you think
that's where it came?
Do you think that ties in, because obviously he talks a lot in the show notes about authenticity and the idea of something being as it is. Do you think that ties into that because you're not forcing it with elastic? It's kind of a forced.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's true. He does talk about the podcast about every fabric you use is completely different. I mean, I just did a bias dress for someone myself, and the thing is, we sampled it in one thing, and then you do it in something else, and then suddenly it's a completely different dress. So it's very complicated. I think the other thing too, which I would like to see, which we can't see right now, is the video, because I think that will actually, those bias cut
I think we have some
suits,
snippets of in movement.
if we see that in movement, it might actually give
We
us
can
a
show
better
you some.
indication of how the bias in the tailoring works, which I'm assuming we're going to see that. So you'll get a movement that will be quite different.
Yeah.
But in the flat photo, it's very difficult to see. And if you didn't have a checker pattern, you're right, we wouldn't necessarily be able to see that it was biased.
Do you think his focus on bias is a way of bringing his myth into a house that isn't his name? Because the idea of bias is very much associated with his work, almost from...
Well, that's a very interesting thing, and you're anticipating something that I want.
Sorry.
No, but it's good. I mean, it doesn't matter. I have other things, but I've spent a lot of time on this today, obviously, and I was excited about all the materials that we receive, etc. But then I kept thinking Galliano. I mean, I didn't even think Margiela, which for me is not a problem because I think all this is genius, but that's a good question you just asked. I mean, this is very John. Much more John than what we've seen recently, isn't it?
I think the previous collection was more kind of in line with Margiela because it was more subtle. It was like, it wasn't as much of something you couldn't casually wear on the street, which this is.
Very John Galliano, right?
And I think it's very romantic, which to some extent is kind of at odds with the original Margiela, which was more conceptual, subtle. I mean, no one really knows anything about Margiela himself anyway.
One of the words in the podcast that really struck me is, because I mean, we all know the codes of Margiela, which are, and that's why Margiela can exist. I mean, the naysayers will say what they want, but in reality, the codes are so strong that the brand, that's why the brand exists. But the one thing that John Galliano said in his podcast, which kind of was a bit jarring when I think Margiela, is he said sexy.
Yeah.
Margiela's never been sexy. In fact, if anything, Margiela sometimes in the past has been quite ugly, but obviously we still appreciated it.
He calls it sensuality for a new mentality.
Yeah.
Which I think is very interesting because he goes on and on about, you know, transcendence of gender, authenticity, repurposing, new couture, you know, and it's like he really needs to move forward in a way, and I don't want to read too much beyond the line, but it's a little bit John coming out as John and a little bit less like Margiela that he has respectfully, you know, followed, but now it's his time to shine. Am I wrong?
I feel like there's an interesting thing about placing sexuality into menswear, because I think Gaultier did it fantastically, but sometimes in a very kitsch way. And I think Galliano had always done it in his own menswear collections, sexualized the male and turned the male into objectified, I think, to a certain extent. So again, I think maybe he's finding elements in his own mythology that he can transfer and that he can adapt and that he can reuse. And maybe that's what he's doing here.
That's interesting.
But I always thought of Margiela as sort of secret signs and symbols, you know, the 4-point sewing on the back of jumpers, jackets, a label. And menswear is not my expertise whatsoever, just a caveat. But I'd say menswear to me is all about those signs and symbols historically, whereas that collection doesn't have that at all. And I wonder what you all think of that, because I think for me, I went to see Reigning Men, which is an exhibition about menswear, and in it were L'Ensemble, which inspired Galliano's graduate collection. And it was a subcultural group, Parisian, that kind of mixed all these. Well, you can talk about it much better than me, I'm sure. No, I know you can. Yeah.
It was a very brief period around the French Revolution, where there was a kind of cultural assertion of politics through dress, for men and for women. Very new, looking for women back at neoclassical styles, and for men, a style, quite a complex style, which Galliano has always referred to. And that is, you know, even for the 18th century, quite sexualized. The silhouette of the man's leg is very much revealed.
And there's just kind of like shorn hairstyles to represent when you're about to get your head guillotined off. It was political and sort of, it was about these secret, why I brought it up, was about this secret signs and symbols. And I think the fact that he was inspired by that for his graduate collection, it kind of shows his interest in, well, history, tailoring, and actually, I don't know if you agree, Jeff, but you can kind of see things of it.
I think what I'm pleased, in some ways what I'm pleased that I can't see Galliano's historicist obsession. I can still see the cultural cross-reference that he's always had, but I can't see, and I'm thankful that I can't see that element so much of looking back to the past in the Margiela menswear.
Do you think that?
You think it's looking much more forward here?
I think so, yeah. Yeah. You know, there's no one there that looks like Napoleon. There's no one standing there with their arm inside a great coat.
That's why I asked.
Thank goodness.
You meant my costume, because for me that's costume, but it's not what you meant.
Do you think to do that now would be too kind of camp and kitsch?
I don't know, because I think it's almost there's a new generation from when Galliano showed his first menswear collection, and I don't know how those people would respond to it. For me, I'd feel like, oh, that again.
Or like maybe it's...
No, there is one bit again of the podcast or of the interview, I don't remember if I read it or heard it, and I think it's very, very interesting how he talks about the way the youth reinterpret like black tie. You know, he went to the Met and he said, I'm there with my Savile Row suit, and I'm like, ooh, there's so many new, different way of interpreting it. And he's very interested about it. He said, that's so exciting, that feeds creativity. And he talks about streetwear as something that feeds creativity very much. So I think it's really looking much more, he's more excited to look ahead than to go back and reference history, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. I also think, too, it's an interesting point to make that we kind of, in terms of this kind of, whatever, zeitgeist or something that potentially is happening, that we had Raf doing couture satin in his show, which was yesterday or the day before. Yesterday. But it's like suddenly we have two as a coincidence. Let's see what happens. Maybe Kim at Dior will do something, I don't know. But it's like, this is something that obviously is in the ether.
Yeah,
I know it's not the same, but I think there is, because Raf did talk about couture in his notes. So whether he knew something or not, I don't know. But
I always ask, and I asked you once, how happens that some trends are seen by everybody, you know? And you said to me, because we, as designer, we know what's going to happen, or we know what the world needs, and maybe this is the time for men's bespoke and men's couture that moves forward from Savile Row, as you said, or from...
People see the same exhibits, they read the same magazines, they read the same books.
They don't live in a vacuum.
They talk together. And the funny thing, too, is that I think more than any other time, especially in London, as designers, we all talk to each other, which I think maybe 20 years ago didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, we're all kind of friendly, we kind of have conversations, we kind of pick each other up when we're like falling over, and we kind of...
What I think is very refreshing is the use of color much more in menswear. you know, and color that, like we're seeing here, pink, I mean, that were considered women's color, and now who cares? It doesn't matter.
Do you think that's a code, though, that he should have respected? Because obviously Margiela's always been a big focus on all white in a lot of cases. Do you think he should
That's another question that I have for you. Minimalism and maximalism. I mean, John was the king of maximalism and Margiela was the king of minimalism. I mean, do you think? I don't know. Well, I have an opinion, but maybe yours is...
I think he's respected minimalism in the sense that it's the clothes themselves aren't as like big in volume as they were when he was at Dior. But I also think he's gone on and changed it slightly, changed Margiela, given especially that Margiela said, like, it's your house now, do what you want with it, respect it, but do what you want with it. I think he has changed it and he has given it his own touch that is slightly more romantic, but equally still more minimal than previous.
Than what it was. But I think that's more linked with what we were just saying, his path right now than trying to still respect the codes of Margiela.
I think I think he is. I think you're right. He's respecting the codes, but in a very, very clever way, which I think a lot of people, the people who maybe aren't obsessed with Margiela, may not get. But the thing is, even though here we've got like a baby blue, like latex trouser, but there's an element of shine, which is one of his codes.
Yeah.
So there are like, you know, or the corsets, which are in like nude leather. Nude is also one of the codes. Yeah. So I think he's kind of subverting the codes in his own way.
That's brilliant.
But I think he kind of has to in a way, because otherwise, I think there was a lot of people had a problem with somebody trying to do Margiela. So I think it was his only way to actually make it go forward, was to make it his own. Love it or hate it.
I feel
that's a very good point. Yeah. Too many people were trying to do Margiela and he's showing them.
And plus also, Margiela is a trend now. Like everybody's copying Margiela. So in a weird way, they kind of almost can't be Margiela, if you know what I mean. They have to do something else because otherwise they look like a lot of other brands.
I think what I'm finding interesting, it's taken me 3 or 4 times of watching it for more of those codes to start emerging. So it's not as if the codes hit you in the face. And now I'm thinking, oh, the gauntlet, the transparency, the overlayering, even the cowboy boot. It's like more and more and more of them are there, but they're actually just slightly behind this kind of Galliano screen, which I think is really clever.
Yeah, and you know, it's also a short collection. It's 34 looks, which for me it's refreshing because when there are many, many looks, then you get a little bit lost. At least I do. But it's good that we're talking about this because I can only see John Galliano this morning, you know, and I was listening to his voice, and I was reading his interview, and I was so, and I had lost Margiela a little bit, but I'm finding it. It's very clever.
Do you think when you go into the shop, all of that stuff that you expect will still be there? And this is actually an added layer that's about audience and audience development and bringing in
I'm
new
excited
people.
to see what the actual commercial collection is going to look like because as he says, this is the laboratory. Yeah. So I think the shapes, the ideas and the silhouettes and things will get translated into ready-to-wear. I mean, remember, this is couture. So the idea that these young men are going to go in and experience couture is a small percentage because it's going to be expensive.
But then I was thinking about it a lot, about the way that it's reached this place and space in popular culture, being like cited by Jay-Z and Kanye in What's That Jacket, Margiela, and things like that. You know, it actually, the men wearing Margiela is quite vast. You know, I think that it's quite interesting to see how, you know, you talked about everybody copying Margiela and everyone else is doing it anyway, so this is something different. I just was quite intrigued by, when you go into the shop, what you'll see and how that translates, because it wasn't that. It was quite niche, it was really special, and you had to be in the know to know. And then it kind of became something else. Then it was, the baton was handed to Galliano. So it's actually a whole new time for it maybe anyway,
I couldn't agree more, but he says it, he clarifies it very clearly. Sorry, clarify clearly, but anyway, that he's going to do ready-to-wear from this collection, and he said, I'm going to take the key cuts and the key elements and transform them into ready-to-wear, and he said, I can do that. I mean, this is the couture one, it's bespoke, it's artisanal, but then it can be translated into ready-to-wear. So he has this commercial, in a good way, approach that it's very serious and respectable, because it's a business at the end of the day, and so it can only be image.
It's relatively easy to take a great idea and commercialize it than to take something like from the other side and try and make it great.
So you said it's easier? Or
it's easier, yeah. It's easier to take great ideas and be able to commercialize them.
Because you can almost design that into the concept, can't you? You can design it thinking, and then when I do the second range, I'll take this.
You just take a few layers away, you do things, you fabricate them differently, and things, it can work. It won't be the same, but in terms of the aesthetic and the vision and the vibe, you can achieve that. And then that's basic. It'll be interesting to see, because it's going to be a co-ed show.
Yes, he also said that there will be elements of this taken into the co-ed show. And so the ready-to-wear side will be seen in the co-ed show in a month.
Yeah.
Plus, it'll be interesting to see the artisanal women's.
Yes, that's what's
coming.
happening next month.
Yeah,
which will have another podcast.
He talked about the co-ed show for ready-to-wear in September, October.
Has he talked at all about what the experience of the couture will be? Because the whole Savile Row thing is, there's this kind of mystery of you go along and the measurements and you become part of that tailor's history. You know, your details are all documented, you go back with the...
Yeah,
so he hasn't really talked about...
No, he talked about the experience of, from him, looking at a customer who was being, was in a fitting, and how he said he could sit and he felt so free, you know, it was more from within his emotion. It was very, very interesting to hear, but no, I don't know how it would work, but I guess it will work like in any other couture house, right?
I think he does risk cheapening the ready-to-wear, though, if he's taking like assets from this artisanal line and then using them again. And I think if we look at the previous collections before, there was not much difference between some of the artisanal stuff and the ready-to-wear, like the whole kind of holographic jackets and things like that. He kind of reused a lot of those materials and stuff, and I think it's not enough just to make it more commercial. I think you need to be producing a different collection.
Do you think that's because they're for different people?
I think it's for different people, but equally, I just don't think that's an excuse. I think he should have to produce two completely different collections, or at least with their own righteous theme.
But he certainly will, but he said, I'm going to translate for this collection, translate it into something that it's actually sellable in a store and produced in a larger number. But this collection will have to be sold, so it's not going to be sold only one piece to one person.
But equally,
we'll see it in the co-ed show.
But also, you have been able to buy quote-unquote artisanal pieces in the shop off the peg, because we all have
been able.
They have the 0 circled and then the 10 circled. So I have pieces that are considered artisanal, where you get the 0 and the 10. If it's 0, it's women's wear or whatever, and then the 10 is men's. But if they do both circles, it's artisanal. So you have been able to buy them, and they're not prohibitively expensive.
But so they're probably not bespoke. They're not made.
No, they're not bespoke, but they're considered artisanal. So it'll be interesting to see when you go for a fitting, and what does that label look like? Because we haven't even seen it.
Probably there's a new label, because it says these are made for you, on your body, fitted for you, you know. And as I said, if you'd don't like the kimono in that MAC look, but you want that fabric in something else, that's my job to do it.
And
that's the way couture's always been run. We don't know the reality of it. The reality of it is that most of the time it's not always the nicest, but they've got the money to pay for it. They change it completely.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want the dress on the runway, but I like the print. But I want a mini skirt, and I want
it in green.
And they make it, and they're like, okay,
and I don't want the sleeves.
£50,000, you can have it.
It must be sad for a designer if they
I would think so.
butcher your design.
But I think that's why the premiere probably do most of the work. And the designer steps outside.
I had a friend who used to do it for wedding dresses, and the stories were, which we won't get. They're not my stories, but they were really good. I mean, it's really interesting, that idea of choice, having choice, and not accepting someone's vision, and it's financial. That's very interesting. Like comes down to taste. And why you want to be going to that designer anyway.
If then you don't want his vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But that happens with photographers, with architects, with anyone.
Strange, isn't it?
I wanted to have a word about the rest of the show. I mean, the accessories, the styling, the hair and makeup. I think there are some interesting things here. I would like to have your take on those.
I think they're particularly feminine, and again, I don't think they're too over the top. But going back to what you said about you're not sure who the customer is, I kind of agree. I think this is very much a collection for a gay man, and I don't think it would. I don't think it would particularly appeal to a lot of people like within the fashion industry at the moment who are.
Well, I think if you look, I mean, look number one is an amazing jacket that from the back looks like a cape. I mean, I would wear it, and I'm not a gay man, obviously, but. And there's the two black coats that I think they're much more for everybody.
What about rappers?
Yeah.
That's
You know,
exactly. Look at that.
I don't know. Look at their love of Gucci. Yeah. It's kind of.
I feel like we long lost the association between sexuality and flamboyance. And you know, the exhibition that Shonagh's just talked about, which went back to menswear in the 18th century,
macaroni,
shows that, you know, menswear historically was extraordinarily flamboyant, and it's recent history where it's been reduced to the black.
But you say it about rappers kind of mentioning Gucci and stuff, but I look at the clothes that they're actually choosing from that, and they're not the ones that are more flamboyant, they're not the louder ones. And like the same with Jay-Z mentioning Margiela, like I just can't see him wearing a lot of these clothes.
No.
And I think it's kind of partly down to being able to say a name for him.
But couture isn't for people to wear, is it?
Can you?
Well, couture is to make a directional statement. Mm-hmm. It's to show the skill of your house and the skill of yourself as a designer, and to make a directional statement. You know, the couturiers in the 50s used couture to say, this is what you'll all be wearing in 6 months' time. And I think I agree with you. I think this is, it's laboratory, it's experimental. It's about someone giving themselves the space to move forward their understanding of fashion. And I think creative people have to have that space.
But then, how do you feel like this relates to, again, like, I don't want to excuse myself all the time, but it's not my expertise, menswear. But how do you think it all relates to London and what's happening with people like Art School and Charles Jeffrey? I think it's very similarities. Rottingdean Bazaar. I hope I haven't left anyone out, because it's really exciting in London. You know, so much exciting stuff going on. And I think especially that middle black suit with and the cowboy boots. I don't know. Is there a comparison?
I think he's very influenced by what's going on.
Yeah.
I think.
And he says that.
He's exactly. But also, which is really interesting when I looked at it, because I immediately thought of all those designers, and I thought it was really interesting because maybe, if anything, they will now be forced to up their game as well, because what he's taken kind of their world and elevated it, because it is completely elevated from what's happening, which is a good thing, because artists tend to do that with each other.
Yeah.
They kind of like, one gets better, the next gets better, and all that.
Their aesthetic is quite DIY, whereas this is what he's saying. It's like, this is impeccable. Everything is sewn to like the most beautiful.
Yeah, Margiela should be a bit DIY as well, because that is part of their code. It's not actually DIY. It's not actually a code, but I can't. Deconstructed. But the other thing I just realized, there's no season attached to this, is there?
No.
That's interesting because couture is normally, this would normally be autumn winter, right? We're going into autumn winter 18.
Yeah, and autumn winter.
So, and I was looking, going, wait a second, he's not defining this as a season, which is interesting as well, because that, I think the world of fashion is moving in that world as well, where it's
also,
like,
by
not
the
about
styling,
season.
I don't think it's attached to a gender.
Who did the
Really.
styling? Do you know?
I don't know who did the styling, no. Does he do it himself?
I think he does it himself, right? Can we check? Isn't it on the press release at the end?
No, it doesn't say. I mean, it may.
Sorry.
I'm kidding.
No, it's interesting
he does it
though,
himself.
because I'm not actually sure
You
myself.
can ask the audience.
I always find that it's interesting on women's and menswear, because even when I was doing my work, I always liked kind of that coming so close to the barrier on menswear without stepping the mark, which I always found really exciting. Like it's a bit like, because that whole rock and roll thing, where the rock stars get so close, but they really, you don't step over the line type of thing. Because when you step over the line, it's kind of like, it becomes a boy in a dress, which is not really the same thing as being gender fluid.
I agree.
But it's interesting how that line of crossing is now more and more blurred. Because now I'm not sure, you're talking about it's very feminine styling, and I'm thinking in some ways, yes, but our eyes are being retrained now to what that actually looks like. So for me, that's quite exciting. I still am a believer that it's menswear. I want it to still feel like menswear type of thing, and I think it does.
Well, it calls it menswear, but what I'm trying to say is that, and that's what I heard, if I understood well, is that it's menswear, but what does actually menswear mean today? What's men's sexuality, not sexy? What does that mean? This is
Art
menswear.
school showed at Man, didn't they? Art school showed for like at Man.
Men's fashion.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, but what John says in this podcast is that this is menswear, but what does menswear mean? And that's what I actually see here. You know, it's like I'm repurposing, I'm reinventing it, right?
But he's the master of reinvention of his own style, so that's quite interesting. You know, like his bow would always be in the outfit of the season. So he was always dressing himself, or is always dressing himself by what he's inspired by. I'm quite interested in that generally in terms of fashion designers.
Yeah, absolutely.
How they kind of wear their heart on their sleeve, and you can see what they've been intrigued by, like fabric or historic or whatever, you know, by how they're styling themselves. So
It's interesting, he doesn't do that anymore.
No.
So it's almost like he's now putting that on the catwalk.
More, yeah.
no, he doesn't.
So maybe this is like his outlet.
Yeah,
Because
maybe.
he used to do that all the time.
There was an exhibition a while ago at Les Arts Décoratifs, which was called, I think, Couturier Superstar, and it was looking at the main designers who were working in couture and couture styling. And I remember that the Galliano section in that exhibition was just a lot of TV monitors, each showing him taking a bow at the end of the show. There weren't any clothes there, it was all just him.
It was a whole preparation.
Yeah, but that was fantastic because it absolutely represented in a really brilliant way his engagement with fashion.
I would like to give you a few other hints about this being a Margiela show. First of all, it was in the atelier, so in the Maison Margiela atelier, so it was done there. And then the sculptor Tony Matelli, so the work, the sculptures that are there, the set, it says here the monumental works are in keeping with the Margiela aesthetic, using reclaimed concrete and marble statuary alongside common objects to create new works of art. And then together, the 4 pieces from Matelli 2018 series, Garden, are meant to challenge perceptions of material and permanence. And that's apparently in line with the ethic of Margiela.
I really like the sculptures. I think they're amazing.
Those fruits look so real, and they're bronze.
Oh, amazing.
They're cast in bronze and then painted on.
But I think the form is so important, to Margiela, but also to the podcast and everything that is talking about materiality. And I feel like these were really, I think I really like them actually. thought they were better than an Instagrammable, like...
Incredibly Instagrammable.
Yeah, they were, but they were good as well. So that's like the perfect marriage of the Instagram moment, or whatever you call it, because they're an added extra, and they make you think, which is really nice, and they're really nice. Their artwork, you know, it's like instead of just having a picture of, I don't know what you could have.
Are they artwork though, or do they become set?
No, I think he's a sculptor, so...
No, but when you're there in the show, do they become a set?
Like, you mean a prop in a set?
No.
But they're very interesting, and I think they make you think, what do they mean? Why are they? What, you know what I mean? And I think that's always interesting. It's, as you said, you know, it's beautiful to photograph and post, but it means something. So.
Yeah. I think because he's a sculptor and his intention was free, I hope, then it's not a set, because it's not a commission in saying, oh, hey, we would like some pillars here, please. And
I suppose I'm not asking about intentionality, I'm asking about the experience of it as someone going to the show, unless you read the press release or you get that information.
Yeah, when you read the press release, you read the intention, you know, and it's all about the permanence of materials and the clever material subversion. So, and that's linked with what we just discussed about the show. But then when you go in, it's just beautiful and it's hard.
I instantly knew because, you know, the exhibition caption, aka the Instagram caption, was tagged with the artist. Then you follow it to the artist, and you realise what other work he's done. And I don't know, that's a kind of, it's a win for me.
Which is great if you see that before you go.
No, I'm talking about as an outsider. Like,
no, I'm asking about the experience of someone going to the show.
Oh, like if you don't know, you just think it's a set design.
Well, no, I'm asking, what do you think? What is your interpretation of it?
It is a set design.
Yeah.
By an artist.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
And who did the lighting and the red then? Because for me, that's probably more effective and more evocative than...
The actual set. I don't know what there's a set for...
It's nice, isn't it? I thought it was all really lovely.
Sorry.
I don't know, I think a lot about form. I was reading about the exhibition Margiela did at Boymans in Rotterdam, and about the form, and I don't know, I just thought of that instantly. So maybe the fashion press might think of that kind of thing, the busts and the forms that...
But I think that exhibition, I think, was very much grounded in a challenge to the permanence of museums, to create something for a museum that's going to rot.
It's our geek off, really, isn't it? It's so great. It's such a great exhibition.
And they're brilliantly, there are some pictures from the Boymans exhibition. Yeah.
Basically, they were busts and they were infused with mould, and they were sat outside to rot, really. And this question around clothes being in the museum, I mean, it's really our thing, you know. But I think, I don't know, I thought that the forms evoke that, but maybe it's me reading too much.
Is it not also the sculptures used in the show, are they not also kind of referencing the found aspect that we saw like in Margiela through all the years? And the kind of like taking objects as we find them and using them to create something else?
Absolutely. So, anything else, Todd? About
probably
Margiela,
a lot of things,
your
but
love
like,
of Margiela, we had very good description of every look, which I think it's an interesting thing to do as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's kind of, you know, it tells us even more of the story of what we're seeing. I haven't read them all yet, but it gives you more information. Yeah, definitely.
Did we enjoy?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
very much so.
Good,
I'm kind of curious to see what comes next.
Yeah, well, in a few days.
Yeah.
At Couture.
And I want to see the video.
And then in
Because I want to see this in movement. I want to see what happens on it. Like, I want to see the movement of everything, because I think that's a big part of what we can't see in a photo.
And the back of every look.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot more to see, I think, than what we're looking at.
Okay, shall we give him a round of applause?
Yeah.